Members who are attending virtually should keep their video feed on as long as they're present in the hearing. Members are responsible for their own microphones, and please keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. Finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk, whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. So good morning, and welcome to today's hearing, Space Situational Awareness, Guiding the Transition to a Civil Capability. First, thank you to our distinguished panel of witnesses for being here virtually today. I'm pleased that we're finally able to handle this important hearing. Previously scheduled hearing dates had to be postponed due to changes in the House voting schedule and to a memorial service for a former House member. But today we're here and we're ready to discuss this urgent issue, Space Situational Awareness, or SSA. SSA is the ability to identify, understand, and predict the locations of objects in space so the potential collision risks can be calculated and this information shared with operators. The growth in space activity has made SSA crucial. Space-enabled services like communications, national security activities, banking, weather forecasting, and Earth imaging all depend on the ability of systems to operate safely in space. However, safety is far from guaranteed. Mega constellations of thousands of satellites are creating orbital congestion, and the orbital debris left behind is compounding the risks of operating in space. The sustainability of the space environment is in peril if we don't act. Understanding and mitigating the risks starts with SSA. While the Department of Defense is providing SSA services and information to space operators for decades, the increasing complexity of the SSA function, the resources required to manage it, and the need for ongoing improvements are becoming an increasing burden. In 2018, Space Policy Directive Number 3 recognized the need for a civil agency to carry out basic SSA capabilities so that DoD can focus on its national security mission. I totally agree. But then how will the transition from a DoD space system to a fully operational civil SSA capability actually occur? Some entities suggest that commercial companies can perform the civil SSA function and already do so, if only on a smaller scale. And others argue the problem has been studied to death and we need to just get on with it. But first we need to know exactly what we're getting on with, because the transition to civil SSA remains unclear. What functions and responsibilities should be transitioned? What SSA data are needed and who will provide it? What services and information and at what level will the civil capability provide? And what roles will the government have? And where should the commercial sector contribute? The current approach to civil SSA is the Department of Commerce's Office of Space Commerce Open Architecture Data Repository, OADR. In 2021, the office demonstrated this OADR prototype to enable SSA data sharing among government and commercial space operators. For fiscal year 2023, the office is requesting a whopping 550% increase in funding toward bringing the pilot to an operational capability. What the OADR is, what it would be required to do, and how it would evolve, however, are open questions. And the path forward for civil SSA has not been defined, and it needs to be to avoid the mistakes of past programs gone awry. DoD's own attempts to upgrade its legacy SSA systems ended up nearly $1 billion spent and a decade lost before the agency canceled the JMS program. Today's hearing will examine the questions, actions, and issues that must be addressed to enable an effective transition. We need a plan to move quickly. And while SSA is an essential first step, it's just one element of space safety. We need aggressive actions to mitigate the further creation of orbital debris. We need a framework to define who moves where and when in space, so-called space traffic management or space traffic coordination. And while the U.S. has led the world in actionable SSA services and information, other nations are quickly getting into the game and developing advanced approaches to SSA and space traffic coordination. We can't afford to lose our edge, because while space safety is a global issue that requires spacefaring nations to work together, we must continue to lead the way. I'm pleased that the Biden-Harris administration is doing just that by taking initial steps on norms of responsible behavior, which includes their new recent announcement of a commitment by the U.S. government not to conduct anti-satellite missile testing. And this is in stark contrast to the behavior of some of our global adversaries. This subcommittee and the full committee are taking very seriously the establishment of a robust, evolvable civil SSA. We're currently working on the draft Space Safety and Situational Awareness Transition Act of 2022. Today's hearing will inform that process, I look forward to working with my friend, the ranking member, Dr. Brian Babin, all our members, and the broader stakeholder community as we advance legislation to address this pressing issue. And with that, now let me recognize our ranking member, the good gentleman from Texas, Dr. Babin.
Thank you, Chairman Beyer. Really appreciate your leadership. This committee has focused on space situational awareness, or SSA, for several years. We've held numerous hearings and considered two significant pieces of legislation: the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act, which passed the House by voice vote, and the American Space Situational Awareness and Framework for Entity Management Act. These efforts by the committee informed the development of Space Policy Directive Number 3, which called for the Department of Defense to transfer its current responsibility to share SSA data to the Department of Commerce. The debris created by a recent Russian anti-satellite test highlights why SSA remains an important issue. As I said at our subcommittee's hearing in 2020, near misses in space attract media attention and calls for draconian regulations, but overreacting could be just as detrimental to our nation's space enterprise. There are, however, some important issues that I think we can still all agree on. First, we need better data. The information the government and the private sector rely on to make sound decisions absolutely needs to be improved. Uncertainty is too high, which could lead to unnecessary alerts and unpredicted conjunctions. As a result, the private sector is stepping up to the plate. They are developing cost-effective, timely, and accurate SSA data and services, often relying on off-the-shelf and non-military technologies. In some cases, commercial capabilities are superior to DoD's. This is good news for America and for the global community, and we should foster the growth of these nascent industries. Secondly, the Department of Commerce is the right agency for the job. I'm closely following Commerce's plans to stand up this capability. They don't need to create a bloated bureaucracy, nor should they duplicate DoD's existing architecture or reinvent the wheel by building new systems and sensors. They should just be a commercial storefront that takes the government's data, integrates it with any necessary commercial and operator data, and makes that information available to the public through commercial architectures. We aren't ready for space traffic management or being a traffic cop in space. Instead, we should elevate the Office of Space Commerce out of NOAA so that they can better coordinate across the department and throughout the government and internationally as well. Commerce already houses several agencies that are relevant to space. I will list a few: NIST, BIS, ITA, NTIA, and the National Weather Service, and NOAA. Elevating the office is key to their long-term success. Commerce also has a history of partnering with the private sector to nurture emerging industries. Commerce stood up the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN, through a contract with a nonprofit organization. ICANN was the organization responsible for developing policies, coordinating best practices, and managing the processes that led to a stable internet that we enjoy today. We've already seen the space community adopt a similar approach on their own. Several years ago, operators founded the Space Data Association to share information and improve safety. The SDA demonstrates how the private sector can collaborate and innovate. More recently, the Space Safety Coalition was established to provide similar capabilities for operators in low Earth orbit. The third issue we should all agree on is that we need to develop better standards and practices. And rather than imposing a top-down regulatory burden on an emerging sector, we should adopt a crawl, walk, run approach. NASA, while not a regulator, has a long history of demonstrating responsible behavior and researching orbital mechanics. NASA, along with academia, and the private sector can play an important role in advancing our understanding of the orbital domain, as well as facilitating the development of non-binding, consensus-based standards, best practices, and customs. This could be done similarly to how NASA developed internal orbital debris mitigation standard practices that eventually informed the International Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee's Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines. These standards and best practices could also be augmented by contributions from the insurance industry, similar to the role that they played in the very early days of maritime shipping. We have a lot to learn about how to operate in space, but I'm very optimistic. I believe that we can all work together to ensure space remains a safe and prosperous domain without smothering the private sector with burdensome regulations or crowding out of commercial solutions. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to an interesting panel of witnesses. And I yield back.
Dr. Babin, thank you very much. I'd now like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a written statement from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. If there's no objection from Dr. Babin, it's entered into the record. And if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point or at any point during the hearing. At this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses who are with us virtually. Dr. Matthew Hejduk is a senior project leader at the Aerospace Corporation and currently serves as the chief engineer of the NASA Satellite Conjunction Analysis Risk Assessment, or CARA program. His research interests include satellite conjunction assessment techniques, satellite radar and optical signature modeling and analysis, estimation theory, and space surveillance network modeling and simulation. Dr. Moriba is the director of the Computational Astronautical Sciences and Technologies Group at the University of Texas at Austin, where he is also an associate professor of aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics. His research focuses on the convergence of policy, technology, and security related to space traffic management and space situational awareness. Prior to being at UT Austin, Dr. Zhao worked for at the University of Arizona, the Air Force Research Laboratory, and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Dr. Andrew DeUva serves as the strategy and policy advisor of the Space Data Association, or SDA, a nonprofit space traffic management organization. Mr. DeUva led efforts to create the legal and data sharing frameworks of the SDA and has supported international commercial satellite and telecommunications businesses for more than 2 decades, with the present emphasis on government services, space sustainability, and cybersecurity. Mr. Kevin O'Connell is the founder and CEO of Space Economy Rising, LLC, and has over 35 years of experience in the U.S. government and research organizations and as an entrepreneur and business leader. His prior U.S. government assignments include positions at DoD, the Department of State, the National Security Council, the Office of the Vice President, the Office of the Director of Central Intelligence, and most recently, as the Director of the Office of Space Commerce within the Department of Commerce. Dr. Marielle Borowitz is an associate professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. Her research deals with international space policy issues, including international cooperation in Earth-observing satellites and satellite data sharing policies. She also focuses on strategy and developments in space security and space situational awareness. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony, which could be significantly longer, will be included in the record for the hearing. And when you have all completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. So we will start with Dr. Matthew Hejduk. Dr. Hejduk, the floor or the Zoom is yours.
Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Bateman, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to join this discussion. I am on the staff of the Aerospace Corporation, a nonprofit federally funded research and development center whose purpose is to provide advice to the government on all aspects of the nation's space enterprise. The full 33 years of my career in the aerospace discipline have been dedicated to space situational awareness, the last decade of which as a subject matter expert for the orbital safety mission for NASA. It is a great pleasure to give testimony today on the subject that has constituted my life's work. The very title of this hearing testifies to the consensus, both on the part of the government and within industry, of the need to transition the U.S. government's support of the civil and commercial orbital safety mission, which is the principal non-military use of space situational awareness, to a civil agency. The remaining question is the best way to do this that provides needed capability while promoting a healthy synergy of government and private industrial goals. The orbital safety mission, which is the process of keeping active spacecraft from colliding with space debris and with each other, is divided into three parts. Satellite conjunction screenings, which look several days into the future to determine which satellites will come within close proximity of each other. Conjunction risk assessment, which determines which of these close approaches actually presents a high risk of collision. And conjunction mitigation planning, which plans a satellite maneuver to avoid the high risk close approach. In support of civil and commercial space, the DoD actually performs only the first part. These satellite owner-operators presently look to their own resources to perform the latter two parts. The first transition step should thus be simply to transfer what the DoD is doing presently for civil and commercial operators to the new civil agency, using the DoD Precision Space Catalog and the existing DoD algorithm for conjunction screening, modified slightly to accommodate a modern computer architecture with a modern and automated user interface. This part of the process is the most basic and would benefit least from innovation, will serve as a good confidence-building measure among owner-operators, and relies entirely on technology proven over decades. The regular export of the declassified version of the DoD Precision Catalog for use elsewhere in the US government is already an established and proven procedure. Once this first step is established and working, the latter two parts of the orbital safety process can be considered. These tasks are, for many owner-operators, performed either internally or by private industry. This is an excellent opportunity to continue to encourage the SSA industrial sector by allowing such companies to use the civil agency's automated user interface and receive data directly for their owner-operator customers. An additional industrial opportunity, hosted as part of the user interface, could be to provide the basic conjunction screening service, but with more flexibility and extremely low time latency. The basic free service modeled after the DoD would thus continue, but owner-operators who would benefit from advanced services can obtain them from private industry, facilitated by the civil agency. One worrisome gap in the current process is its inability to accommodate satellites that perform autonomous flight control, including autonomous orbital safety actions, without any necessary contact with their ground systems. The SpaceX Starlink constellation operates this way, and it will undoubtedly become a favored mechanism for large constellations. Special orbital safety solutions are needed for autonomous systems, and the civil agency can take the lead, perhaps through a government-industry partnership, to develop and implement a durable solution. The availability of commercial SSA data offers exciting opportunities to improve the orbital safety mission through increased data availability, and these opportunities should definitely be embraced. The acquisition of commercial SSA data should, however, be targeted. Not all orbit regimes or objects will benefit appreciably from additional SSA data, and only certain narrow orbital safety objectives will be advanced by an expanded space catalog that contains additional small objects. Finally, while the transition of the execution of the orbital safety mission is important, overshadowing this is the great need to establish standards, guidelines, and norms of behavior for safe satellite operation. The lack of a reasonable, analytically grounded set of such norms, integrated with the FAA and FCC licensing process, is the circumstance perhaps doing the most injury to orbital safety at present. Progress in this area cannot wait for the transition of the orbital safety mission execution to complete. It must be pursued immediately. This concludes my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to entertain any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Let me now recognize Dr. Moriba for his testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subcommittee Chairman Beyer, Mr. Ranking Member Babin. It's good to see you again and hear your voice today. Other members of this subcommittee, thank you so much for the invitation to appear before you today, live from the Space Object Situation Room here at the University of Texas at Austin. And you know, I've testified a couple of times. I'm glad to see that we're finally able to do this today. And I love all the people here that are also witnesses with me. I know them personally and professionally, so it's great to be with them. let's talk about a couple of things. Look, we started launching things in 1957. We track, 30,000 plus objects ranging in size from cell phone all the way to the space station. The number of operational satellites that we had just 2 years ago has doubled in the last 2 years. So basically it's like if you look at all the operational satellites that we had, somewhere around this time in 2020 and the number of operational satellites now, that's almost doubled in just 2 years. That's not a bad thing. That's good. We got some global internet. We've seen some of this, the benefits of that actually to support folks in the war in Ukraine and these sorts of things. So there's positive aspects of increasing space traffic for sure. And we're not going to stop launching satellites. We see people going and taking suborbital flights. We see commercial entities now rendezvousing with the space station, that sort of stuff, more activity, people that have lots of resources going up to space. That's a great sign. We need to see more of that. What are the not so good things? Oh, I don't know, people like Russia blowing up their own satellite and basically causing all this debris that now is a hazard to human space flight. I've heard that the Starlink satellites that fall under the United States, SpaceX, have had to maneuver. I think since the Russians blew up this stuff in November, almost 2,000 times these things have had to get out of the way. That's not so good. When people talk about conjunctions and possible collisions, all these great commercial capabilities, they're awesome, but they're all opinions. So the thing is, when one commercial entity says, hey, get out of the way, the DoD might say, oh, that's really, a nothing burger. Those aren't the droids you're looking for. That's not a problem. Somebody else says, well, it's kind of a problem, but not so much. So there's lots of ambiguity. There's lots of opinions. There are disparate sources of evidence. There's not a combined, aggregated pool of evidence by which to draw consistent interpretations or opinions about what's going on in space. We see the Chinese saying, oh, to the United Nations, well, basically Starlinks were a hazard. US saying, based on our evidence, not so much. I think you kind of get the point. We see astronomers negatively impacted by space traffic and actually discovering natural phenomena that really were satellites that were glinting at the time. I don't know, I looked at this movie, Don't Look Up. I'm kind of worried about near-Earth asteroids because, I'm allergic to things like hitting the Earth and ending all life. And our ability to detect these things is now hindered by more and more things that are reflecting sunlight, getting in the way and confusing stuff. This is all to say, transitioning this to a civil entity is critical. If we want to be able to sustain our way of life, if we want to be able to support space commerce, if we want to be able to support space exploration. And so one of the main goals of this transition has to be measurably making space more transparent. What's up there? Who does it belong to? What can it do? Making space more predictable. Where are things going to be? And given any situation between two entities, can we predict how they'll behave and what they'll do with the information provided to them? And then last but not least, can we develop a body of evidence that's consistent, that is accurate, that's timely, that can be used to help people be safe, more secure, and more sustainable, and hold them accountable for their behaviors in space? That's what we need this civil entity to do. That's what we need the Office of Space Commerce to do. And that is my hope that, from this gathering that we have here today and talking about these things, that we're able to advance that in a way that's very credible. Thank you very much.
Dr. Jha, thank you very much, and thank you for the graphs and your testimony. They're fascinating. We'll next to hear from Mr. DeUva for his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you on this important topic for the United States and for the people worldwide. Space systems are now undeniably essential to our way of life. For example, U.S. private sector capabilities effectively and affordably deliver crew and cargo to the ISS for NASA Global public communications and remote imagery depends on commercial satellites. More than 100,000 new spacecraft applications have been filed through 2029, and 32% of all payloads since 1957 have been launched within the past 4 years. As noted in my testimony, nations and operators each have reasons to avoid collisions in Earth orbit. Space Situational Awareness, or SSA, capabilities are foundational to managing this shared risk. In 2009, following the Iridium Cosmos collision and lack of adequate SSA support from government agencies, commercial satellite operators established the Space Data Association, or SDA. The SDA is an open, nonprofit risk management entity dedicated to safety of flight and space sustainability. SDA's 30 stakeholder participants include leading, fiercely competitive commercial and civil satellite communications, weather, and imagery operators. Since 2011, SDA has offered the world's first private, cooperative space traffic coordination service, operating our Space Data Center, or SDC, at 99.99% reliability. I must stress, it was developed without any government funds. The SDC now protects 769 spacecraft in multiple orbital regimes, with over 50% of the GEO-active spacecraft and 423 LEO and MEO spacecraft participating. Operators contribute data, enabling the SDC to generate actionable, forward-looking collision warnings, deconflict planned maneuvers, and securely share SSA information. In my testimony, I note that SDA pioneered many traits that are now widely accepted as modern SSA system baselines. In fact, SDA's processes and products augmented and improved on DoD's products to the extent that NOAA and NASA became early and continuing SDA subscribers. SDA proudly collaborates with and contributes operator data daily to the DoD's CSPOC. We achieve results using only U.S. commercial entities and technologies, including the foundational SSA analytics engine that fuses, normalizes, and transforms disparate data into usable knowledge. As further described in my testimony, new space operational paradigms seriously challenge legacy flight safety capabilities. Safety requires DOC to qualitatively improve on legacy DoD products for SSA and conjunction assessment. SDA helped conceive and conduct a data fusion exercise for space traffic coordination and management in September 2020, including NOAA participation, which indisputably demonstrated the importance and effectiveness of U.S. private sector analytic capabilities in partnership with government. Accordingly, SDA is disappointed that since early 2021, the Office of Space Commerce's work, informed by the strategic plan, which was endorsed by the National Academy of Public Administration and Congress in 2020, appears to have been shelved, perpetuating avoidable risks and delays. Speaking from SDA's operator support perspective, DOC have not conducted a satellite operator industry days, stated how they intend to incorporate satellite operator data, and improve on DoD's products. Instead, they turned inward, taking a government system development approach with federal research and development centers. Developing new government systems is too risky and slow, and it's unnecessary. DOC's prior commercial partnership vision responded to specific commercial and civil satellite needs for timely and actionable SSA data and space traffic management services. These services are essential to securing space-safe operations, preserving U.S. leadership, and enabling increased use of space. Let me suggest 3 actions we take. First, we should establish a clear 1, 5, and 10-year vision for DOC's delivery of space traffic coordination capabilities, including fee-free based basic services and data. Require DOC to promote, not compete with, U.S. private sector SSA data and analytics providers. DOC should contract existing technically mature, validated commercial capabilities to provide services, not try to develop them. We cannot risk waiting for U.S. government redevelopment, and international competition is fierce. Second, require DOC to qualitatively improve on today's DoD products to ensure DOC products are sufficient for safety and sustainability. For example, Congress could require DOC to use validated U.S. commercial technology to reprocess observational data from government SSN sensors, such as the Space Surveillance Network, and ingest operator data to derive timely and actionable information. This will leverage over $1 billion being spent annually. And third, Congress should curtail public investments to redevelop or study needs for near or midterm government SSA data and STM processing capabilities where private sector capabilities exist. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, sir, very much. We'll now hear from Mr. O'Connell for his testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Byer and Ranking Member Babin. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee to talk about U.S. leadership in space safety and sustainability. Today, while I'm representing my own views on this topic, I'm also a member of a group of experts organized by the American Institute of Astronautics and Aeronautics, or AIAA. AIAA sent a letter to the committee last October, and I have resubmitted it along with my prepared testimony. Mr. Chairman, the need for the United States to create a civil SSA capability is as urgent and as compelling as ever. As part of it, there's a need to fully leverage commercial providers in the interest of making rapid progress, ensuring compatibility with space operators and allies, and the ability to leverage massive private investments in information technology and other areas. Safety is fundamental to all space operations and is the key enabler of the extraordinary opportunities we expect in the space economy. One of the most important benefits, as you've already mentioned, Mr. Chairman, is that it will free up the U.S. Space Force to focus further on its national security missions. The Biden administration has reaffirmed the principles in Space Policy Directive 3, which acknowledged the urgency of the problem, mandated a whole-of-government approach to mitigating it, and recognized the critical importance of working with industry and international partners. I would like to emphasize two key points on the shift to a civil SSA system. First, it's often thought that the mission given to the Department of Commerce and SPD3 was to replicate or simply shift the DoD system over to a civil agency. While some linkages do need to be incorporated, a civil SSA system will have to be adaptive enough to accommodate rapid changes in space over the next few years, such as the projections of 100,000 satellites and new complex missions like satellite servicing. It will have to be a state-of-the-art system in order to accomplish this. Second, there's sometimes a perception that the ultimate goal is improving conjunction warnings. While it is certainly the most immediate goal, accomplishing that will actually enable wholly new services related to space sustainability. For example, the historic decision to unlock the military GPS signal fueled the development of commercial services that we use dozens of times every single day. Another natural beneficiary of a civil and commercial SSA system will be the space insurance industry, as more open data will inform their risk models and improve all of our understanding about risk in space. Aside from U.S. debris mitigation policy, national space policy not only directs U.S. leadership in commercial space activities, but that federal agencies play a key role in encouraging it. Hardly a week goes by without a major report or expert opinion expressing concern that the government is not moving fast enough to leverage commercial capabilities. In my prepared remarks, Mr. Chairman, I have highlighted almost 30 years of observations on commercial satellite imagery, which I might describe as a long and challenging path to government adoption. The problem, as many see it on space debris, is that we're out of time. We don't have 30 years to deal with this problem, and we don't want to have this conversation in the wake of a terrible accident in space. The United States has a diverse and impressive group of companies focused on SSA and related capabilities. Some are focused on unique sensing of the space environment from Earth, and they'll soon be joined by space-based sensors to detect, track, and provide insights into the behavior of debris and other space objects. These companies are staffed with world-class talent, and all are leveraging world-class capabilities in data management, analytics, and other areas that have formed the basis for critical decisions in healthcare, finance, and other areas. Some are already under contract to NOAA and the Space Force. We can leverage these capabilities immediately. International cooperation is key. Because of the growing concern about the space debris challenge, our allies in the United Kingdom and Europe and Japan are moving independently, including leveraging of and encouraging their commercial organizations. Russia and China, on the other hand, are advancing their own initiatives as they sense an opportunity to challenge decades of unquestioned American leadership in this area. As we create a new civil SSA capability, simply making token commercial purchases will not be enough. There's nothing wrong with the government being a first customer so long as it's not the only customer. A large, slow, traditional government approach will not work here, mainly because of the speed at which the space-based debris problem is changing. Worse, it could wind up stifling exactly the broad-based innovation that we need urgently right now. A civil SSA system constructed with these ideas in mind will support key U.S. government missions while also encouraging the growth of a new and important part of this commercial space industry. At a time of great concern about America's ability to compete against our adversaries while still being able to unlock the tremendous opportunity of space, We need a new outlook and new ways to harness the speed, agility, and anticipation of the private sector. Congress has not been silent on these issues. In the past, Congress has been pivotal in telling the executive branch not to build what it can buy in the market. This is, as I understand it, this is being discussed right now in conference as part of the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. I would urge Congress to fund, demand expediency, and oversee proper execution of a civil SSA capability that capitalizes on the themes that I've highlighted in my testimony today. Thank you again for the invitation to participate, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Connell, very much. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Marielle Borowitz. Dr. Borowitz.
Thank you. Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on this important topic. Space assets are critical to the global and U.S. economy, as well as U.S. national security. And one of the most fundamental missions for ensuring safety, security, and sustainability of space is space situational awareness, or SSA. Right now, the U.S. Department of Defense operates the most advanced SSA system in the world. With the rapid growth of activity in space, and particularly commercial activity, there's been a recognition that some components of the SSA mission should be transitioned to a civil agency. However, as we've heard, there are still a number of important decisions to be made in relation to this transition. So in my testimony, I want to focus on two key issues: mission definition and commercial engagement. So with respect to mission definition, a decision needs to be made about which elements of the SSA mission will be taken on by a civil agency. SSA requires collection of raw data, data processing and fusion to create a catalog of space objects, analysis to identify potential collisions in space and determine their likelihood, and the provision of the resulting warnings to space operators around the world. At the very least, a civil agency would need to take on that last part of the mission. A civil agency would be the main point of contact and the prime interface for US SSA capabilities for the world. However, there are benefits to having a civil agency do more. A civil agency that generates its own raw data from civil or commercial sensors, generates its own independent space object catalog, and generates its own conjunction warnings can be much more open and transparent about these activities than the US military. When the US is transparent about the data and algorithms it uses, this facilitates trust and encourages international partners and commercial satellite operators to rely on US data, strengthening US influence and leadership in this area. Openness and transparency also allow the United States to better leverage the commercial and academic communities. When government data is freely available, entrepreneurs can use the data as building blocks to create new and innovative products and services. Similarly, researchers with access to SSA data and algorithms can carry out research that improves US space situational awareness capabilities overall. We've seen this open data model work well in weather and in remote sensing, where we have open data sharing by the government and thriving commercial sectors. And it applies in the case of SSA as well. The second issue I want to touch on is commercial engagement. A civil agency will be well suited to leverage the strengths of the commercial SSA sector. However, it must determine how best to do so. Which function, products, and services should be provided by the government, and what should be done by the commercial sector. I would argue that the government should focus on providing timely, precise, and accurate conjunction warnings to all space operators globally, as well as open access to underlying data and analysis to the greatest extent possible. Some of the data needed to support these efforts should be purchased from commercial entities. Commercial entities should also provide tailored SSA services directly to customers. This division of responsibilities would best contribute to the long-term safety and sustainability of space. It would serve US national interests, maximize overall socioeconomic benefits, and promote innovation in the commercial sector. Let me explain a little bit more about why I think that's the case. So nearly half of all operational objects in space are owned by the United States. The US is the most reliant on space objects for its economy and national security. And therefore, providing these high quality warnings that help satellite operators avoid collisions and ensure the long-term sustainability of space is really in the US national interest. Safety is also an important government mission. An example from the weather sector is useful here. The United States has a thriving commercial weather sector that's capable of producing a wide variety of products and services. And yet, the government provides forecasts, severe weather watches, and warnings for free. If tornado warnings had to be purchased from the private sector, surely there's lots of people that would buy them. However, the National Weather Service continues to provide the highest quality warnings free of charge. And this is because the government has a responsibility to ensure that all people have access to this critical safety information. And the same is true for SSA. Third, and discussed earlier, open open data and open science allow the United States to unleash the entrepreneurial and research communities, and that helps to maximize socioeconomic benefits. In this framework, commercial entities have a significant role to play. Commercial entities provide those tailored SSA services, similar to what's done in the value-added weather sector. They may also sell data to the government that can be incorporated into government SSA capabilities. And this would ensure that the US government can benefit from the innovation occurring in that sector, and that strategic sector will continue to flourish in the United States. The transition of an SSA capability to a civil agency can enable the United States to strengthen its global leadership in this area and more effectively leverage its commercial and research communities. With an organized, efficient, and transparent civil SSA system, the United States will be able to lay the path for a safe and sustainable space environment. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify on this important topic, and I look forward to your questions.
Dr. Borowitz, thank you very much. This concludes our 5 presentations, and we'll begin a round of questions. Let me start with Dr. Borowitz. It's pretty clear from these 5 testimonies that the primary conflict's probably too strong a word perhaps, but the thicket to work our way through is what should be Department of Space Commerce's responsibility and what can be drawn from the private sector, the commercial thing. You mentioned that it does make a lot of sense to have 2 U.S. agencies conducting very similar missions. What role do you see for Department of Space Commerce or whatever civil agency ends up with the responsibility to conduct its own analysis when there apparently are a number of private sector entities capable of doing the analysis instead?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So I think that there are a lot of ways that the U.S. can structure the way it builds that system. And I think certainly we should be leveraging the commercial sector. The key thing is the product that comes out of it, those conjunction warnings, those need to be freely available to the operators, right? Those need to be provided without any service fee. And the other thing that I think is important to focus on is the amount of transparency that we can provide. So while I think we should leverage the commercial sector and potentially even for some elements of the analysis, I think we want to be careful about having a completely opaque system. So if it's done by a commercial entity that then can't share any of the underlying data or algorithms or things they do, that would really limit some of the benefits I think we get from moving to a civil system and being able to be more open and transparent than what we had with the military.
Great. Thank you. Let me pivot to Mr. DeHuva on essentially the same issue. You've talked about what the civilian SSA capability and how your space data centers put together a great U.S. space catalog, and you're willing to share this. Would you respond to the issue of the openness of the data? And I know this is a committee where, in a very bipartisan way, we like as much open data as possible. And also on the fees, is there not a structure in which the federal government could be paying, in some cases, the commercial sector to develop this and then make it free to the American public?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that it's important that the federal government, Department of Commerce, Office of Space Commerce, be seen as the provider of the capability, right? And that underlying capability can be provided commercially and transparently. We've seen this in the SDC, where we have a lot of discussion and dialogue with the users, with the satellite operators. They want to know how the processes work and how those warnings are derived. They also want to ensure that when they are, we are forward-looking in the SDA. We're not just looking at the sky and saying, well, what might happen. Operators also contribute maneuver data, so we can forecast what will happen based on operator intentions, and that doesn't happen anywhere else. So that's an important capability and why there needs to be a single fusion center. But transparency and openness are critical, and it's one of the reasons that DoD needs to keep doing what it's doing with its own capabilities, and the civil and commercial capability and data center has to be built from a lot of the same inputs, but with more transparency while respecting national security equities.
And Dr. Duva, or Mr. Duva, under this responsibility, who's got the responsibility for safety issues? Is it the commercial entity that's providing the data, or is the government, Department of Commerce, as the one transmitting it to the public and to the various users?
I believe that it should be the government itself that takes on the responsibility of ensuring that there are quality products available globally to users of space. And that derives from the fact that the United States has liability, as other nation states do, under the relevant treaty frameworks for actions undertaken by their private sector operators in space. It's just in the U.S. interest to ensure that the highest quality safety products are made available as broadly as possible.
Dr. Jha, you talked about accuracy is not enough. You also need to have precision, and the precision has to do with uncertainty around how accurate things are. Is there a specific recommendation coming from this insight that's relevant to this discussion?
Absolutely. You know, there are these things called dimensions of data quality. It's a formalism, along with, again, accuracy, validity, completeness, uniqueness of the data. I think these are the things that Office of Space Commerce needs to be able to do, and it's inherently governmental, just like you know, Andrew you know, just said, in terms of, you know, helping ensure the best quality products out there. It's not so good to just give opinions about where stuff is in space and how things might behave, but there's ambiguity, and every single decision is actually made based on this ambiguity, based on this notion of uncertainty, because we don't know the truth. Error is the difference between what we predict and reality, and we don't necessarily know what reality is because our sources of information are biased, they're corrupt, they're incomplete. And so I think this is really the importance of you know, this civil SSA capability, is to aggregate all these different opinions and sources of information from this aggregated set, use this to actually remove ignorance and ambiguity so that the precision can actually converge on something that's usable in a very meaningful way.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jha, very much. Let me now recognize the Congressman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for his questions. Making the leap of faith that Mr. Posey is with us virtually. Okay. Let me now then turn to the other Congressman from Florida, Mr. Webster, for his questions.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know enough about this to ask a question, but I'd like to focus in, Dr. Borowitz, what's the specific research priorities that the federal government should invest in to advance SAA capabilities?
Sure, thank you for the question. So I think there are a number of things that we can do. I think there were mentions in a number of the testimonies of some of the technical areas where we can improve the types of data, look at which types of data are most useful, look at the algorithms we're using to do that data fusion, look at the algorithms we do to see if collisions are going to happen, improve, as Moriba said, both the accuracy and the precision, other kind of elements of that data. So I think there's a lot of work still that we can do there. As someone coming from a School of International Affairs, I think there's also work we can do on the social science side that will be important to look at how we organize this system both within the United States and how we engage in international cooperation in this area. Really is an inherently international issue, and it's something we want to be on the same page with other nations about. So I think there's work in both areas.
So how do we ensure that this doesn't do any harm to the commercial opportunities?
Sure. So I think, you know, the U.S. has this really impressive SSA commercial industry already, and we certainly want to acknowledge that and build on that. So I think as this moves forward, you know, working closely with that industry, making sure we understand what the opportunities are for the industry is going to be important. I think we do have models for doing this in a productive way. I mentioned the weather industry and remote sensing, where we have the government playing a really important role. The government collects weather data, it analyzes weather data, it puts out forecasts, it puts out warnings, and yet we have a huge commercial weather industry in the United States, very successful and growing. And they work closely together, the commercial industry and the government. And so I think there is good precedent for that. It can be done. I think it should be done, very purposefully and carefully, but I think we have some good models for that.
Yes, well, we've had a hearing on just the weather issue. It was pretty impressive. So can these items be separated out, and or do they have to work with other things, not necessarily related to weather, to make sure this all works?
Sure. So I think, the SSA industry is going to be separate from the weather industry, but just can have some lessons learned from the way things have been structured there. But in terms of coordinating what are the roles of the government versus commercial, I think the key thing is for the government to continue to provide the conjunction warnings, those warnings of potential collisions, to global users free of charge. And like I said in my testimony, that's in the U.S. national interest. We really don't want to have debris created in space. We don't want to have those collisions. So we want to make sure people have that information. And I think beyond that, tailored services, if somebody wants information very specific to their satellite, something maybe they're planning in the future, that's a great place to go to commercial. If the government wants to bring in more data, I think certainly we should be taking advantage of this commercial data that's out there. That's another opportunity. So I think there's lots of places that commercial entities can still play a role. And I'm sure they'll think of more ideas as well and continue to innovate in that area. And it's really this core kind of safety product the government should provide, as well as kind of general openness and transparency as much as possible.
Thank you very much. I yield back. Go Jackets, by the way.
Thank you, Congressman, very much. Now, let me recognize the senior leader of the Congressional Science Committee, Delta, Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Yeah, he says that because he didn't join us in Colorado, but that's okay. He broke my heart. So first I want to thank the chairman for putting this draft together, because I think this is a very urgent matter. Both understanding where the objects are, where the debris might be, where different things are, as well as providing a civilian context to really start policing, if you will, or at least cleaning and being aware of what's up there. So we avoid the accidents, we avoid collisions, we avoid, bad outcomes. And so, I've been supportive of moving things to the Office of Space Commerce, out of the Defense Department. Maybe some of the responsibilities of NASA all reside there, so that they can then develop the regulations for both commercial, as well as keep an eye on the stuff that we have up there that is just floating around, is potentially dangerous. So let me ask to all our witnesses, what are the most critical actions that need to be taken to ensure an effective transition to a civil space situational awareness capability? And to go along with that, what do you think Congress can do to effect a smooth transition? Anybody? Bueller, anybody?
All right, well, I'll go. Look, I think this really has to be worked as a matrixed organization, meaning recognizing that, the Office of Space Commerce isn't the Lord of the Rings, one entity to rule them all that knows how to do all this stuff. Other parts of government need to come together, coalesce to help this be successful. Everything from policy and regulatory aspects to the scientific and technological that could be led by organizations such as NASA. And I think really lending an ear to the community to try to address the community needs, instead of just saying, hey, how do we just take what's currently being done and give it another like storefront? That's not gonna do it. We have needs that go way beyond what's currently being done. So I think,
Like what?
well, look, astronomy. Right now, there's no capability to help astronomers predict light pollution from reflecting objects. There's nowhere to find that at this point. For instance, we have in space servicing and manufacturing. I just saw, the White House put out something on that. All these companies that want to go service something else, the catalog that's currently maintained by the DoD represents everything as if they were cannonballs. Everything's a sphere. Nothing actually looks like a satellite in their catalog. So when people want to service something, we're not interested in servicing spheres. We're interested in servicing things that are satellites. Is it brittle? Where do I grab this thing? How is it tumbling? Does my technology work for it? We have no place to point people to actually get that information in a way that is effective and usable. And I'll even say one more thing from a liability perspective. If there's a satellite, let's say operated by, I'm just going to pick some African country, Ethiopia, right? And they want it serviced by an American company. What if that satellite from Ethiopia actually shares liability with China? What does that US company do? Do they just talk to the Ethiopians and service it? What if China doesn't like that so much?
Yeah, but here's my question to you. At some point, we got to have somebody who's in charge of all this. You can't have a bunch of different entities, but somebody's got to be, and maybe they're not the Lord of the Rings or the Lord of the Flies or whatever, but there's got to be a place where this resides, particularly on the commercial side of this. And right now, we've got different agencies, particularly the Air Force, maybe NASA a little bit. But this is a burgeoning area. You just mentioned 2 or 3 or 4 more things that I certainly hadn't thought of. I mean, doesn't somebody have to be in charge of this?
Yeah, so just very, very quickly to let other people here talk. When I worked at JPL, which is a matrix organization, I had a project manager and a line manager. And I guess what I'm saying is that it's fine for commerce to be the project manager, but all the line elements need to be other agencies. That's what I'm trying to propose here.
Gotcha. And I think that makes sense because there are so many different potentials here. So my time's about up. I'll yield back to the chair, and thank you for your answers.
And Mr. Perlmutter, Mr. Webster, we will have time for another round or 2 or 3 if you so wish. So let me move to round 2. Mr. Hejduk, Dr. Hejduk, you're a senior project leader of the Aerospace Corporation. It's pretty clear already that the tension that we will have to work to overcome with setting up this responsibility. Actually, let me pause because, are you ready to jump in?
For questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Then we'll go back to round 1 with our ranking member back from solving the conference committee between the Senate and the House on the Competes Act. Thank you for doing that.
Sir,
And-
just came back from the Senate side.
And the time is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. I want to say thank you to all of our expert witnesses and our panelists here. My questions would be, number 1, to Mr. O'Connell. The Department of Commerce's recent budget request proposes to acquire a SSA capability similar to DoD's capability. Previous testimony before this committee highlighted that legacy infrastructure and acquisition processes made it difficult for the Department of Defense to employ commercial approaches to modernize space situational awareness capabilities. For example, the U.S. Air Force spent billions over the last 30 years but failed to modernize its systems and still uses decades-old technology. Mr. O'Connell, what can Congress do to ensure that commerce does not have to reinvent the wheel or adopt the same failed acquisition approach?
Congressman, nice to see you again. Thanks for the question very much.
Yes, sir.
I think the first thing that we should say is that Congress in this area, just as in other areas, should really mandate maximum use of commercial capabilities, both to take advantage of what I see as a playing field of commercial companies that's really highly complementary when I look across all of the companies that I'm aware of. And so insisting that that be a key element of this. As I said in my testimony, we are not going to simply replicate what DoD has. We really have to create a state-of-the-art capability on the civil side for all the reasons that we've all spoken about, that can keep up as the space environment changes very, very rapidly. This is going to move very, very quickly. There need to be new ways, and this is a common refrain in today's world, of new ways to think about acquisition. How can we creatively, credibly, competitively get money into the market in a way that we're comfortable on behalf of the taxpayer I think it's very much doable in this area. But the key is getting money into the market, not only to use and experiment with the capabilities that are in the market or just about in the market, but also to encourage this important segment of the space industry.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate your service, too. Mr. Duva, the cloud-hosted space data center has evolved into one of the largest clearinghouses for spacecraft operator data, which provides geographic diversity, military-grade computational security, a legal framework, high availability, ongoing forensics, data quality checks, and comparative space situational awareness analyses. The Space Safety Coalition offers similar capabilities for low Earth orbit. What are some of the strengths of private sector organizations in coordinating data sharing and developing best practices, and what carrots can be provided to incentivize operators to join such groups?
Thank you for the question. It's been an interesting journey because the SDC capabilities that you outlined were cutting edge, but they rely on U.S. government data for a catalog. And what we saw as the gap of data capability was the lack of transparency because of national security equities. So as we looked to improve the capabilities, we investigated whether we would be able to build our own catalog and essentially provide a basic flight safety service. And that's where we discovered that, in fact, only some of the satellite operators in space are interested in paying for these services. Instead, many don't know the limitations of the current, for example, the legacy DoD products that are available publicly. And so what they don't know, it doesn't hurt them until there's a problem. And even one problem in orbit is too many in this area. So it's very important that we leverage those commercial capabilities that exist to transparently provide a capability under the auspices of the Department of Commerce, but available to everyone. And I think that's the opportunity that lies before us.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And one last question for Kevin O'Connell again. Liability significantly influences how operators act in space. How can the government leverage the insurance industry to influence safe operations without regulations?
Thanks, Congressman. Great question, and it's a topic you and I have talked about before. I think the insurance industry and the space insurance industry specifically is a key next user of the kinds of data that will be available on the civil side. The challenge that the space insurance industry has had is that they do not have enough data for many different new things in orbit to inform their risk models. And so I think in the process, they will benefit from the data that's available in the civil system and be able to characterize risk in a way that will help us all understand different aspects of risk in space. Second point, just quickly, is I think an earlier question was about the kinds of research that is being done in this area or that could be done. I still think that there's an enormous amount of, if you will, economic and financial research that needs to be done. When I look at discussions about regulation, we really need to understand the economic and financial aspects of that in addition to the technical aspects.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I just have one little announcement I'd like to make, a public service, if you will. I'd like to take just a moment, Mr. Chairman, to recognize Jeff O'Neill from Representative Perlmutter's office, who is here today. I've been told that this is Jeff's last committee hearing as a staffer. This is it. Jeff has worked closely with my staff, great friends over the years, and while we may not have agreed on everything, like Jeff's boss and I, but we agree on a lot. Our offices have accomplished some fantastic things together, especially for the space community. And so I want to say best of luck to you and your future endeavors, Jeff. Wish you the best. Thank you for your service, and your bosses too. God bless. Okay.
Thank you. I think only appropriate now to recognize
Yeah.
Mr. Perlmutter for whatever
If I could have
disconcerting.
if I could have a moment of personal privilege,
Granted.
I'm embarrassed. Thank you, Dr. Babin, for recognizing Jeff. Jeff has been instrumental in my office for a dozen or more years now, particularly on the Science Committee, where he and I have this passion for outer space and our space research and our space exploration and all of those kinds of things. The two of us have been like twins, even though we're not the same size. In terms of our love for this committee and our love for space exploration. And Jeff obviously has done so much more. He's handled the Rules Committee packet of things that I've got to do as well, which is a pretty busy schedule. Our office is going to miss him desperately. The constituents of the 7th Congressional District are going to miss him desperately. I've never for a second had any concern that I wasn't getting good information, that I wasn't prepared for this committee, for different things we were going to do. He helped with the Science Committee staff, and I should make a note of this. We had a fantastic trip, and I tried to get everybody. Don can attest to this. We had a great trip to Colorado last week, and Jeff, together with the staff, put together a visit that I wish everybody had been part of, just in terms of the science that's going on in Colorado and the laboratories and the aerospace and all that stuff. But to my friend Jeff O'Neill, the Congress is going to miss you. I know your future endeavor at Planet will be something very exciting for you. And, you know, Brian sort of one-upped me here, but his remarks are everything that I feel and multiplied by about 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Babin, Mr. Perlmutter, and Jeff, I know, along with all the rest of us, we felt so betrayed by Representative Perlmutter's announcement of retirement that we had no choice. But we know you'll have a much better job in the years to come at Planet. So.
Working for me.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on to something less serious, now let me recognize the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross, for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's good to be in the hearing room. After coming through COVID, this is literally the first time I've stepped foot in here, and it's great to see people back. So we're here to say goodbye to you, Mr. Perlmutter, but it will not be the same, and certainly our trip out west to see the assets that our country have really reinforces why we are who we are. It's just, it was great. But let's talk about situational awareness, and something I've been focused on since my early days sitting on the HASS subcommittee on strat forces, where space was virtually the domain of the Defense Department and NASA mixed in. And the idea that it is now a commercial entity in addition to assets to defend nations literally around the world. And we're seeing what Russia is doing with their space assets in Ukraine and certainly China. But as we start to move into this area of the commercial, one of my biggest concerns, and I'd love to hear from the witnesses on this, is about how do we ensure the accuracy of the information on the commercial side. That difficult blend between not as much the U.S., but certainly some of the non-friendly nations, to make sure we're being provided to the commercial side that information that will accurately indicate that there could be a potential collision or other issues. So how do we ensure that based on a number of the proposals that we see? And I would open that up to each of our witnesses.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I'm chomping at the bit to kind of address this. So one of the things that I guess I would ask to people there in the room is, how do you know that you have the world's most accurate clock? And the answer is, you have hundreds of them. That's how we tell time. We have hundreds of atomic clocks around the globe, and the United States is one entity that aggregates all these opinions about time, finds the barycenter, the centroid, the mean of all those opinions in a weighted sense, an ensemble of clocks, to come up with what the time actually is. And then accuracy is based on the difference between that ensemble clock time and what's on your wrist. We can do similar things for stuff in space. This is the difference where the Office of Space Commerce can step in and again, aggregate all these opinions, commercial, international, that sort of stuff, look at the statistical consistency of the opinions, and then therefore be able to infer what is the best fused answer out of all these opinions, and be able to then judge how far off are other people from that centroid or barycenter. That is something that we know how to do. It just needs to be implemented.
And certainly, as you give me your answer, the standards, and we were just in Boulder talking about the standards of the world, which are so important. So for the rest of the witnesses, incorporating those standards into the accuracy.
Congressman, it's very, very important. It's another reason why the Department of Commerce needs to have the lead role in this area. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is our national expert on standards. And so to help evaluate standards, even ones that come from the bottom up, as we say, out of the private sector, to look at new standards that are being evolved, that's a very important government role. When new companies come into the market, there's a role to validate the kinds of capabilities that they are saying they're providing as part of an integrated system, as Dr. Jaws just said.
Anyone?
Yeah, let me make a couple of comments about that. Validation is difficult. It takes experts, it takes time, it takes a lot of test cases, it takes exposure. And one of the greatest impediments, I think, to using fused solutions and solutions from other entities is to go through this validation exercise. And it's considerably simplified if the providing entity understands their own errors very well, but you have to get them to a level of maturity where that happens as well. One of the reasons I look like the one dinosaur on this committee here, proposing the transition of some basic DoD capabilities first, is because I think they represent a very good foundational level that you have to show equivalence with in order to be brought into the fold as a data provider. And we can get past the idea of what data are good enough, which data are not good enough. If you provide something of the same look and feel and heuristic quality as the DoD, you can be admitted. And that is a much easier standard to assess and certify than absolute standards for accuracy and precision, which are much more difficult to establish and then justify.
I see my time has run out, but it's also about cooperation. The U.S. obviously can lead the way, but unless all nations participate, we are flying with one eye closed. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norcross. And now let me recognize virtually the Congressman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Thank you very much for having this hearing, Chairman Beyer. Mr. O'Connell and Dr. Jha, we all understand the seriousness of space debris and the threat from the small pieces of debris that are not tracked or are difficult to track. And it seems like it is something that needs more data, continually better data, and increased resources from both Earth and on orbit. Mr. O'Connell, how can the private sector provide augmenting data to better improve space situational awareness?
Thanks, Congressman. Nice to see you again. This is a place where the private sector continues to innovate. We are working right now with a couple of organizations that are looking, for example, at how to use high altitude UASs, aircraft, and sensors that look up to try to deeply track and identify what is known as the lethal non-trackable space debris. And so there are a lot of people that recognize the gaps that exist in our current coverage and things that need to be understood in a much better way. Private sector is investing in those, they're innovating in them, et cetera. So, again, it's another reason why we need to encourage the commercial industry forward on this topic.
Thank you. Dr. Jha, I want to go back just a little bit to your last discussion here about the gaps in R&D related to space situational awareness and how NASA and the Department of Defense can engage or better engage with the academic community to fill those gaps.
No, thank you so much for that question, Congressman. So look, in terms of some technical gaps that currently exist for SSA, for one, we do need to get better measurements. If you want to know something, you have to measure it. We don't have enough eyes on the sky, as it were. we certainly, the United States to this day still has no commercial space-based SSA capability for a variety of reasons that kind of maybe go beyond the scope of our conversation here that we can talk offline about. But, you know, that needs to be resolved because the US would stand to benefit quite a bit from having a commercial space-based SSA capability. And in terms of how to engage with academia, I have to say, this is where you've hit a sore spot with me. I'm so frustrated by the absence of funding for academia in this regard. You know, the National Science Foundation doesn't consider this to be basic enough research. Everybody says it's somebody else's problem. Oh, this SSA space debris thing, it's not alluring enough. It's not interesting enough. It's not, you know, it's not basic research. And so the Air Force Office of Scientific Research and the Air Force Research Lab, by and large, seem to be the only people that disparately kind of care about this problem and funding it. So I think that there definitely needs to be a very serious pool of funding to allow the DoD and other entities to actually engage with academia. And every year I'm turning away students that are US citizens that want to get involved because there's not enough research support to actually get these people you know, through the system and delivering great on science and technology. And the thing that is really the thing that really upsets me is that a lot of these companies that we're talking about helping them thrive, where's the workforce coming from? They're hurting. Every day I'm getting people emailing me saying, hey, can you just send over like a dozen students? I'm like, well, they're not growing on trees. Like, where do I get these students from? So this is a big problem that we need to fix.
Yeah. Where do you think we start? I mean, what would your suggestion be?
Look, I think that the academic community is actually ready. It's begging. We actually, if we could have some cooperative agreements, if we could actually, you know, Congress could say this amount of money is dedicated to space situational awareness, scientific and policy research, that would be a great start. And the thing is, there is no pool identified uniquely to support the research.
Well, listen, thank you very much. I see my time is about to expire. I thank all the witnesses for appearing today and deeply appreciate your comments. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Posey. We'll now go to a second round of questions, and let me begin. Dr. Hejduk, you're in this unique role as the head of a senior project leader at FFRDC. If I wildly oversimplify the conversation today, on one end of the bell-shaped curve is the notion that we need to stand up a second, a parallel to the DoD space situational awareness within the Department of Commerce, hence the 550% increase in the budget and the like. On the other end of the bell-shaped curve was the notion that our civil sector can do it all. And of course, no one's argued for either of those. But Dr. Hejduk, in the draft legislation we have, which has not been introduced yet, of course, we call for a mandate for the maximum use of the civilian capabilities. How do you figure we best balance that, as opposed to standing up our own Department of Commerce capability?
Yes, thank you for the question. In this hearing, even though it's titled Transition to a Civil Capability, we've actually talked a lot about end states and haven't talked all that much about transition. I think when in my testimony earlier comments, when I talk about beginning with the DoD capabilities, that's in order to establish a foundation and give us a springboard from which we can move to an almost entirely commercial end state, in my view. If we try to meet the timelines that are laid out in the draft legislation, we're going to have to move very quickly. Fastest thing we can do to build confidence in the broader community is to be able to emulate what the DoD is doing presently for the CDM, Conjunction Data Message Distribution. And then what we can do is run that in parallel with other commercial proposals, some of which are actually funded by the DOC, to show how they are performing against the DoD baseline. And what that will do is provide the transparency where owner-operators out in the field will then look forward to the changeover from a DoD capability to a commercial one. If you talk to owner-operators, and we talk to a lot of them at NASA, they if you propose changing the information that they have, well, hey, don't change anything. Like, we know it's there, we like it, we know how to use it. If we were suddenly to knife switch to a commercial capability, I don't think that would be received very well by the owner-operators who've spent a decade learning to use the DoD product and have written software that uses it automatically. Instead, we need to phase in these improvements. So where am I in the bell curve? I'm well over on the commercial side. I don't think that this needs to be an indigenous, government-produced acquisition product. But I do think we need a much longer transition time, and we need to show the improvement so it doesn't look like we're from the government and here to help.
Thank you very much. Dr. Borowitz, a parallel question. Do you see our potential legislation's use of the idea of mandating the maximum use of civilian capabilities in any way to conflict with the concerns you had laid out in your testimony?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So I think it just depends on exactly the way those partnerships are set up. I think absolutely we want to leverage the commercial industry and the strengths that already exist there. And there are lots of different ways to structure those partnerships. If it's done in such a way that all of that data and those processes are seen as proprietary and it becomes a black box, then I think we lose some of the benefit of moving to a civil agency. And if it's done in a way, as I believe it can be, that allows us to still have some open data, some transparency, even while we leverage those commercial entities, then I think we still get the key benefits we want from that civil transition. So I think, yes, it definitely is possible to leverage commercial to a very large extent if those partnerships are done in a way that still emphasize transparency.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Duva, Dr. Jha complained, that's probably too strong a word, but noted that there was no commercial space-based, underlying space-based SSA. Is that coming from the NDC or others?
Probably not, unless the Congress acts to fully fund DFC activities, because as Kevin O'Connell mentioned, the government might be a good first customer of such a sensor, that would cause the private sector to want to launch space-based SSA sensors and then develop the capability. But absent that, we can make pretty quick gains with just improving on the existing DoD CDMs that were mentioned, just by including more data about them using a lot of the same sensor inputs that are available today. So I think we can get a long way towards improvement by bringing modern analytics processing capabilities to some of the data sets we already have, and then augmenting those data sets with ground-based SSA capabilities that are commercial, perhaps space-based SSA capabilities, and other sensor types, not just whether it's radars, electro-optical, RF, there are other sensor types. So it's a combination that brings us closer and closer to a level of truth that actually becomes actionable for use by operators, and that's the key. And so that needs to be done transparently, as several of the witnesses have said. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you very much. Now let me recognize the ranking member from Texas, Dr. Babin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions for you, Kevin O'Connell. I appreciate you being here, and all you excellent witnesses, Dr. Jha, all of you. But Mr. O'Connell, on April the 15th, 2022, NOAA published a notice of intent to issue a sole source order for low Earth orbit data to LEO Labs. NOAA stated that our market research has determined that LEO Labs is the only U.S. company that possesses the necessary real-time LEO space surveillance tracking data that meets OSC's requirements for its open architecture data repository. Are you aware of OSC's requirements for its open architecture data repository? And if so, are they publicly available?
Thanks, Congressman. I appreciate the question. So 16 months after having left the government, I'm not specifically aware of the new requirements as they laid out by NOAA. Suggest you hear from NOAA directly on that. I think the thing that I would emphasize, and maybe I'm going to tie a bow around some of the last couple of comments, I think it was envisioned back in 2018 that as we began this transition, that we would leave everything in place until everyone was satisfied that there was technical competency on the civil side. And so there will be some duplication, if you will, of effort, redundancy while we do this. And to go to Dr. Hejduk's comments a minute ago, if DoD is going to continue to provide this, then the extent to which we can really experiment on the civil side with new commercial capabilities, new services. There are, in fact, a couple of space-based SSA companies coming into the market. I think it gives us a real opportunity to experiment with what's coming in the market and look at things a different way. I did want to highlight, Congressman, I wanted to highlight an activity known as the Sprint Advanced Training Concept, or Concept Training rather, or SACT as it's known, which has been a venue the Department of Defense and the Department of Commerce have co-sponsored since 2018, but it's been in existence longer than that. And this is a venue within which two things happen. One, the United States works with its allies to actually understand how to transition SSA-related information amongst allies. But more importantly to this conversation, it's been a place where there's been a tremendous amount of experimentation with government transitioning custody of space-based objects to the commercial entities to see the comparative strengths and weaknesses of companies that are in the market and participate in the exercise, obviously. And so that's a tremendous learning opportunity that we already have beside, with us to take advantage of here. So on the specific question of the sole source contract, I think I'd have to defer back to Noah on that.
Okay, thank you. And one last question for you as well. Fiscal year 23 budget request from the Office of Space Commerce asks for $88 million. Do you know how that funding level was derived?
I don't, Congressman. You may recall that in the NAPA report, I think it was page 82, we had our best budget estimates just as I was departing my role at Commerce. And if I recall correctly, we had proposed a budget estimate of between about 40 and 60 million per year during the transition. But again, I don't have any detailed knowledge on the specific budget request for FY 2023. I would make one point that I do hope that in that budget request, given the extent of the budget growth, I do hope there's enough resources left for the other capabilities that the office is required by law to undertake. SSA is the top mission, but obviously the advocacy, the regulatory, and other missions will also have to be tended to as well.
Yes, sir. Now, I think this just shows that there's some need to know on the part of Congress about these requirements that I asked you about, and then also how this office is deriving, their budget requests. That's information that should be available to us. But anyway, I thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Babin, very much. Dr. Babin. Let me now recognize the distinguished gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to start with you, Mr. O'Connell. It's good to see you again. Since 2018, 2019, where there has been some initial transition, how have things been going in terms of elevating the Office of Space Commerce, ensuring that it really begins taking on this role, and is it capable of taking on kind of, I don't want to go back to the Lord of the Rings or the Lord of the Flies, but to take on a real management role with respect to particularly commercial space, but space situational awareness?
So, Congressman, thank you. Good to see you again. I did refer in my testimony to the long battle on commercial imagery adoption, and I know you've been part of that battle on the right side of things. And so thank you for your leadership on that over the years. In terms of the Office of Space Commerce, my views on this are very well known. The job is as much about economic development, job creation, innovation, and things like that, which is the job of the Department of Commerce. The extent to which the Office of Space Commerce sits within NOAA, at a minimum, it has to seamlessly be able to work with all other aspects of the Department of Commerce, and obviously have the attention of the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary. We wish Rich Del Bello, my successor in that role, wish him the best in that regard. It does have the ability, the office does have the ability, and it's an important ability to be the convener, I think is the word used in the NAPA report, and apparently in a brand new report that's come out of NAPA to look at the issue of what the role of the convener means for the Office of Space Commerce. It does have that ability as long as it's able to tap into the rest of the department.
So my next question, a little different, but for you and for Dr. Borowitz. So I certainly want to see commerce and particularly commercial efforts continue to grow in space, but I do share a concern that Dr. Borowitz brought up, and that is on sort of the open source elements of this, that we do make information available to as many people as possible. And is there a tension, do you think, between sort of developing more commercial assets up there to be aware of things that are floating around or that need to be collected and disposed of? Are we going to run into some proprietary problems, or is it going to be open source?
So I think one of the key questions that remains unanswered was something we were working on just as I left Commerce, was the distinction between what SPD3 called the basic service, in essence, what the government would provide available free of user fees, as the phrase is, and the commercial services. And I think the extent to which the government can define exactly what it is going to give away for free in the interest of national foreign policy, other things like that, to define that technically would probably be a very important thing to enable the commercial industry to know where its efforts can start, and that's known as the advanced services in SPD3. I've thought about this a lot since I left the government, and there are different ways to think about that distinction, whether in terms of the precision of the information that the government would provide, in terms of confidence levels that it has in the information, things like that. There are ways to think about this, but it's still an area where I think we need to do some work so that we can actually give confidence to industry as to where its beginning point, if you will, for that emerging space safety industry is starting.
Okay. Dr. Borowitz, can you share what your concerns were in terms
Sure.
of the open source?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things when we're moving this to a civil agency is to allow that, first the freely available conjunction warnings to make sure those are still there, but also increasing the transparency and the availability of data. That was something, there was a 2018 report by the Institute for Defense Analysis that identified that lack of transparency as a key issue for some of our allies and others using our information. So I think that's something that you can really address moving to civil. I think it can be done well with, cooperating really closely with the commercial sector, but ensuring that we still get some level of transparency and openness that's sufficient. And I think Kevin's point about, thinking about what is that basic product that the government is providing, I think that is a really important element. I think it has to be a high quality product that increases in quality over time. In my written testimony, I compare it to tornado warnings, right? You need your tornado warning to be accurate enough, to have a low enough number of false warnings that people listen to it, so kind of an actionable warning. And that's what you need in space as well. If we're getting too many warnings to operators, or they're not accurate enough and people aren't using them, aren't finding them actionable, then that's not a high quality enough product. So when we think about what that basic product is that needs to be freely available and transparent, I think we need to make sure it's actionable.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Now recognize Mr. Posey from Florida for a second round of questions. Hoping that Mr. Posey is on board. I'll give him a minute. If not, then let me recognize. There he is. Oh, good.
I'm still here, but I'm in listening mode. Thank you.
Okay, you're in speaking mode now if you so wish. So.
I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then let me recognize Mr. Norcross to wrap us up for the day.
Thank you again, Chairman. This is fascinating as we make a transition to what is called commercial. And commercial, by definition, has a little bit of latitude in it. The fact that there are players in the private sector do have space situational awareness, whether they're ground-based, space-based, or a combination of each. This is something that has been around, but obviously becoming more and more important, particularly when investments are going into space on the commercial side. So the idea of always using the Department of Defense as a validator, I don't think is realistic long-term because, A, we don't need to give up all that information as a check and balance. But when we start talking about the Office of Space Commerce, we're making a tremendous investment in here. And the idea of going up to 87 million, that major increase, it takes time to ramp these things up. So first of the questions, it's not as much the amount the first year, but are we able to adequately incorporate this in a one-year time frame to stand up, to start doing many of the items that we talked about? So that would be question number one. And when we start talking about open source or proprietary, this is going on already. We have many things up there. But when we start talking about those who want to use this information, there's certain, my opinion, needs to be certain ground rules called a driver's license. If we look back to when airplanes first started flying and what FAA has done, that was certainly an American-based system, but the world also followed, and now we have standards. It's a little different in space because the lines of who owns what is clearly not there. So the enforcement of whatever standards we create is really difficult. How do we punish somebody who's not playing by the rules, who say they're going to do this? And that's access to markets, and this is where commercial comes back in. If you want to use those assets to gain access to our commercial market, you have to play by the rules. So the first question, and I would go to Dr. Borowitz, are we able to use this amount? A, is it enough for this coming year, the 87 million? And can we adequately put it into place in the first year? And then would you talk about the enforcement of any rules for space situational awareness?
Sure. So on the first question of the funding, I haven't looked in detail about exactly how that 87 is broken down. But I will say that there is a huge community of people who have been thinking about this for years. And so I think there is a real opportunity on this issue. You know, you always have to ramp up, but there is a real ability to hit the ground running, and a real desire for that around the community. So I think there is a lot that they can do even in year one if they get the right resources. On your second question about how do you sort of enforce rules, so I think with space situational awareness, really you're providing information. You're providing, you know, people with a sense of where things are in space and where they're going to be in the near future. So in terms of rules, the only thing you might have is kind of the standards for people who also want to provide that type of information. So there's talk about, you know, if you're going to put out conjunction warnings as a commercial entity or provide data, we want to make sure you're meeting a certain standard of quality. And that, I think, as you mentioned, the government can ensure that people are meeting that requirement when they work with the government. When we get to action in space, then we start talking about space traffic coordination or space traffic management. And I think enforcing action there is going to be hard, but I think getting the SSA system in the US organized and set up the way that it's going to work efficiently is going to let the US take a leadership role in those activities. And I think that's going to make a big difference in allowing us to move forward internationally.
Do any of the other witnesses have an opinion on this?
Well,
Yes, thank you. I do.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, Moriba. It's very interesting. Within the SDA context, in order to participate, operators have to communicate their maneuvers in advance and deconflict them. And the information system does this. This is obviously a voluntary activity, but with a DOC-led capability, you could actually verify that what operators say they're going to do, for example, with these autonomously maneuvering satellites, actually are doing it. So by bringing commercial sensors into the mix, which can be used transparently, we start building the foundation for space traffic coordination and management by first having a robust foundational SSA capability that is driven by civil and commercial data products and data sources.
But what happens if they don't adhere to that is sort of the follow-up question that has to be part of it.
I agree. What happens is that first we have to understand that the international framework for operations in space are such that we don't have a command and control environment except through the nations that authorize the launch of particular satellites. So within the United States, it might be an FCC licensed satellite. The FCC would be the, for communication satellite would be the entity that would govern that. But they need to have, as regulators, they need to have actionable data on which to base those regulatory, decisions. Internationally, I think we have to start from, defining what is normal, what is proper, what is improper, and then just like in aviation, over time, freedom led to well-understood norms, which eventually were codified into rules of the road that later became binding. And so we're on that same journey for space, but until we can measure and understand what's happening in space, effective regulation will be very difficult. So I think there's
All right.
a spectrum.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our witnesses for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are excused, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you all very much.